The young men who joined the SS were trained like no other army in the world. Military and academic instruction were intensive, but it was the physical training that was most rigorous. They practiced sports with excellence. Each of them could have performed with distinction at the Olympic Games. The extraordinary physical endurance of the SS on the Russian front, which so amazed the world, was due to their intensive training. The most striking feature of the Waffen-SS was that it was composed of volunteers from some 30 different countries. What cause gathered them, and why did they volunteer their lives? Was it a German phenomenon? At the beginning, yes. In addition to Germans from Germany, Northwestern Europeans, descendants of Germans from all across Europe, enlisted. Then in 1941, during the Great Clash with the Soviet Union, rose the European Waffen-SS. It was on the front lines that the results of the SS physical training could really be noticed. An SS officer had the same rigorous training as the soldiers. The relationship of equality and mutual respect between soldiers and officers was always present. Half of all division commanders were killed in action. Half! There is not an army in the world where this happened. The SS officer always led his troops into battle. To them, Hitler was the most exceptional man ever seen. Hitler understood them and had the remarkable idea to open the doors to the SS. The response to Hitler's offer was overwhelming. Legions from Norway, Denmark, Holland, and Flanders were formed. Hitler welcomed them home. German racialism has been deliberately distorted. It was concerned with making the German race strong and healthy in every way. Hitler was not interested in having millions of degenerates. Today one finds rampant alcohol and drug addiction everywhere. Hitler cared that German families be healthy, cared that they raise healthy children for the renewal of a healthy nation. German racialism meant rediscovering the creative values of their own race, rediscovering their culture. It was a search for excellence, a noble idea. National Socialist racialism was not against the other races. It aimed at defending and improving its race and wished that all other races did the same for themselves. That was demonstrated when the Waffen-SS enlarged its rank to include 60,000 Islamic SS. The Waffen-SS respected their way of life, their customs, and their religious beliefs. Each Islamic SS battalion had an imam. Each company had a mullah. It was our common wish that their qualities found their highest expression. This was our racialism. I was present when each of my Islamic comrades received a personal gift from Hitler during the New Year. It was a pendant with a small Koran. Hitler was honoring them with this small symbolic gift. He was honoring them with what was the most important aspect of their lives and their history. National Socialist racialism was loyal to the German race and totally respected all other races. The young European volunteers had observed two things. First, that Hitler was the only leader who was capable of building Europe, and secondly, that Hitler, and Hitler alone, could defeat the world threat of communism. The communists never aimed at serving the interests of Russia. Communism does not limit itself to acquire chunks of territories, but aims at total world domination. Alone among all the leaders of the world, Hitler saw this concept as an equal threat to all nations. Right through the war, the Waffen-SS never retreated. They would rather die than retreat. One cannot forget the figures. During the 1941 winter, the Waffen-SS lost 43,000 men, in front of Moscow. The regiment de Fuhrer fought almost literally to the last man. Only 35 men survived out of the entire regiment. The de Fuhrer men stood fast, and no Soviet troops got through. And that is what Hitler admired most of all: guts. For him, it was not enough to have intelligent or clever associates. These people can often fall to pieces, as we will see during the following winter at the Battle of Stalingrad with General Paulus. The defeat there was decided by a man without courage. He was not capable to face danger with determination, to say, "I will not surrender. I will stand fast until I win." But he was morally and physically gutless, and he lost. Without their heroism, Germany would have been annihilated by December 1941. The Roosevelts and the Churchills sold out Europe in Tehran, Yalta, and Potsdam. Not since the great religious orders of the Middle Ages had there been such selfless idealism and heroism. In this century of materialism, the SS stand out as a shining light of spirituality. Greatness in adversity is the distinction of the SS.
With the return of the Soviet forces in 1944, the mountain peoples, Ingushi, Balkars, and above all Chechens, are rounded up in dawn raids of new horror. Mobile NKVD units are sent into the hills. Whole peoples, uncomprehending of their guilt, are marked down for punitive deportation. It is the tragedy of a small nation in the hands of a vast and ruthless state. They're dragged from their homes, their lifestyle destroyed, leaving whole areas empty of any inhabitants. And when German troops are driven from the Crimea in May, Stalin is convinced the Tatar people have been guilty of collaboration with the enemy. He immediately dissolves the Muslim Autonomous Republic of the Crimean Tatars and punitively deports 400,000 people, men, women and children. And beyond the misery of shocked and frightened people, the disregard for military needs. This is a time when the Soviet forces need all the transport they can get.
East Prussia, with its forests and lakes, was the first part of pre-war German territory the Red Army entered. It is estimated that as many as 2 million German women were raped by Red Army soldiers.
From 1944 to 47, what occurred to Germany in the last year of the war and the immediate post-war years was a crime so terrible. The world has never experienced such a crime like this. And the fact that it remains a secret doesn't mean it's any less of a crime, but it probably was the largest, the darkest, and the bloodiest secret in world history. The massacres, the rapes, the starvation, the deliberate attempt to destroy a nation entirely. Now, I'm not talking about leaving something left. Basically, that was that's what the Allies were traveling under in the last year of the war and the immediate post-war years. This nightmarish attempt to destroy Germany, a terror bombing toward the late stages of the war, a terror bombing. There's no other phrase that says it quite as well as terror bombing. Long after all military objects have been blown to splinters, the American and British Air Forces continued to blast German cities, blasting the rubble to even more rubble. A lot of folks are still, to this very day, their bones are still buried underneath the rubble in Germany that was built over, of course, after the war. What it was like for a woman, let us say a 45-year-old something woman, a German who was in a village when the Russians finally came, when they finally burst through and the fighting had passed, and then comes the second echelon of Russian troops, for the most part Asiatics and Mongolians from the Russian Eastern republics, and the rapes began. And what does a woman do? How do you deal with rape? And I'm not talking about just one soldier perhaps dragging you into a room and raping. I'm talking about 5 and 10 at a time, for days, for weeks. This goes on. Some women, I mean, again, we're talking in the words of the people themselves, talking to them. They did all sorts of things to avoid rapes. They become almost indifferent to it after a while, almost. Some of them lost their minds, but some women who were actually good-looking prior to the rapes actually started trying to make themselves look uglier. They would feign illnesses and act like they were cripples, and it still didn't work. The madness for the among the Russian soldiers for rape was incredible. And sometimes women were raped 10, 20 times a night, 100 times a week. Sometimes they were raped to death, and then they were raped some more. And, of course, mothers with children were frantic to try to protect their little ones. They'd do anything they could. Of course, they would give their bodies gladly if they could protect their children. Mostly it didn't work, though. There was an old saying from 8 to 88. That was the time. That was the age frame for rapes, if you can believe that. Even grandmothers were taken and raped repeatedly. Even people that were sick and the women who were on their periods. Nothing was sacred, and just very nearly extinguished the German people altogether.
Если вы узнали, что кто-то кого-то изнасиловал, то...
Да, никто на это не обращал внимания, наоборот, рассказывали солдаты друг другу, и, так сказать, это был такой импульс, так сказать, его геройства или доблести, или как так сказать, что он там переспал с такой-то, понимаешь, женщиной, или одной, или двумя, тремя. Вот так. Даже если кого-то там и убили, ну так мало ли что. Война. А подумаешь, большое дело там, понимаете, переспал солдат с какой-то женщиной там или девушкой.
Все дальше и дальше продолжает победный путь на запад, прославленный в боях дивизии.
But there were those who had been glad to see the Red Army. First, the population of the occupied parts of the Soviet Union, and now the Soviet prisoners of war.
Tatyana Neneva, who had served in the Red Army as a nurse, was one of more than 1 million Soviet prisoners of war who had been transported to camps within the Greater German Reich. She was overjoyed when the Red Army arrived, a feeling that was not reciprocated. Nearly 2 million Soviet prisoners of war were liberated by the Red Army. All were to suffer at the hands of Stalin. For many like Tatyana Neneva, their suffering began here in a filtration camp run by the secret police. Their problem was that Stalin maintained that the Soviet Union had no prisoners of war, only traitors. For the crime of being captured by the Germans, volunteer nurse Tatyana Neneva was sentenced to 6 years in the Gulag and lifetime exile in Siberia.